Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. I'm your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I'm a priest with the Church of Christ and a theology professor, and this is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 12, and we're covering Sacrosanctum Concilium, the document of the liturgy, paragraphs 21 to 23 on a desire to reform the liturgy. If you want to follow along, there's reading plans and more information at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Just a little bit to situate ourselves, we're in chapter 1 of Sacrosanctum Concilium, which is on general principles for the restoration and promotion of the sacred liturgy. And we're starting part 3 of that chapter, the reform of the sacred liturgy. Yesterday we were concluding part 2, and we talked about teaching the liturgy, how it teaches in seminaries, priests to teach to lay people, etc. And there's a little note on broadcasting the liturgy. But today we're moving on to this idea of how the principles for restoration and to reform of the liturgy, the restoration reform. So paragraph 21 is really on the desire in general, and it's the only paragraph in this part that's not part of a subsection, because it's going to kind of give a very general outline, and then all the other parts are parts of subsections. And 22 and 23 are the first 2 paragraphs in the first subsection. They're really general norms for such reform of the liturgy. So let's read it. We're going to read paragraph 21 in 2 parts. So 21-1, in order that the Christian people may more certainly derive an abundance of graces from the sacred liturgy, Holy Mother Church desires to undertake with great care a general restoration of the liturgy itself. The liturgy is made of immutable elements divinely instituted and of elements subject to change. These not only ought to be changed with the passage of time, if they suffer from the intrusion of anything out of harmony with the inner nature of the liturgy or have become unsuited to it. Right, so here, there's that idea of, right, we're looking for a general restoration of the liturgy. We're not looking for hey, we're going to degrade the liturgy. No, it's looking for a restoration. There is an unchanging core, but there are variable aspects, right? For example, there's saints. And, when I was a kid, St. Padre Pio wasn't a feast day. St. John Paul II wasn't a feast day. Now they are, right? And that's an example that, I think all of us, wherever we stand in the liturgy, we're all pretty much in agreement that, yeah, it's good to have those, those saints now in the liturgical books, right? As memorials. But it's important to recognize the key parts, okay, we have the sacraments, we have the Eucharist, we have the epiclesis, the calling down the Holy Spirit, and then we have the words of consecration, right? Which are those 2 central prayers. And then we have a lot of other things which are, not as central, right? For example, every Mass should have some readings from the Gospel and from the other books of the Bible beforehand. But it's not said exactly which reading we should have on, the 22nd Sunday or this 22nd Tuesday of Ordinary Time or anything like that. Like, that's not set in stone, and those kind of things can be reformed. Or, for example, one of the things that it's going to talk about, and we're going to have as a result, is we have a more varied readings, right? We have a 3-year Sunday cycle and a 2-year weekday cycle, whereas before it was the same readings, the same day, like the 22nd Tuesday of Ordinary Time, or whatever else, through every year. Now, obviously, beforehand, it wasn't called Ordinary Time. There was a slight difference in terminology, but the basic idea, for those of you who are sticklers. They call it something different, but it's functionally the same. And not every element is here. Not every element isn't going to be in that core part, right? I want to restore greatness. And some elements around the core can reemphasize that greatness, reemphasize, hey, here's the gospel. Hey, here's the Eucharist. And that's the goal we're getting to. And we can add on things, and things often get added on. And sometimes you get added on so many things that take away the focus. For example, one of the things that's going to be taken away is before they would read the first 18 verses of the Gospel of John at the end of every Mass. Now that was removed in the Reform because it's an important thing. If you want to read every day, great, spiritual practice, nothing wrong with it. But to have it almost as a required element at the end of every Mass took away from the more central elements of the Mass. And that's what they're getting at here. And so moving on to the second part of paragraph 21. In this restoration, both text and rite should be drawn up so that they express more clearly the holy things which they signify. The Christian people, so far as possible, should be enabled to understand them with ease and take part of them fully, actively, and as befits the community. Wherefore, the Sacred Council establishes the following general norms. So this last line is going to be basically all the norms to follow in this subsection. It's basically saying that, right? But before that, it's reading that all these texts are meant to point to the holy, point to the sacraments, point to Jesus, point to the saints, point to Mary, things like that. We want our focus to be on those good things, right? And that's really where we want to be. And there is this attitude of, active participation, fully actively, and as befits the community, so they can understand it, so they can participate, right? And you have to remember that this understanding of participation is mainly a mind attitude thing. It's not that they do more physically necessarily. That's not a necessary thing. The necessary thing is that their attitude is offering up this sacrifice. So their attitude is doing this thing, right? And so that is where we have this, right? So this really gives us this idea of, hey, what are we wanting? We want the Mass to be understood so that people can participate, so that people offer themselves, so that people can pray with the priest and not just pray some personal devotion while the priest is saying Mass. And that's the idea of what we're talking about with active participation. This paragraph, like I noted at the beginning of the explanation here, it really sets forward the next. So it's paragraphs 22 to 46 are in this section. I didn't memorize that. I have that in my notes because a little inside baseball. I read these beforehand and then I make a little bit of notes after each section I read for that. They're kind of like bullet points. So little inside baseball how I'm making this, but I don't think that's really affects it too much. So paragraph 22, moving on to that, it starts with a subsection of general norms. It's a straightforward rule about authority, right? So this is pretty straightforward. It has 3 points, but I'm just going to read them all and then give a brief commentary. So 1, regulation of sacred liturgy depends solely on the authority of the church, that is, on the apostolic see, and as laws may determine on the bishop. 2, in virtue of the power conceded by law, the regulation of liturgy within certain defined limits belongs to various kinds of competent territorial bodies of bishops legitimately established. 3, therefore, no other person, even if he be a priest, may add, remove, or change anything in the liturgy on its own authority. That's it. That's this number. And here, when they talk about at the beginning of the apostolic see, that's talking about the Vatican, the Holy See, is what's referred there. There's different names for it, but that's what's referenced. But this idea is that basically there are authorities that can approve it, right? So, like for a new translation of the Missal for all the English-speaking countries, that had to be approved by the Vatican, right? Whereas, and then like change the liturgy if they're like, hey, add this saint's feast day for the entire world, that's approved by the Vatican. But then bishops' conference can approve certain things, and local bishops can approve certain things. For example, the bishops' conference can modify the rite of marriage. They have to double check with the Vatican certain things they want to modify, but in different cultures, different practices that happen in marriage, right? So, like, for example, in our culture, there's the exchange of rings, but in other cultures, that's not the thing. For example, in the Maronite rite, which is not Roman rite, but Maronite rite, they don't do the rings. They have a set of like crowns that they put on the head of the husband and wife as they get married, and that's a beautiful tradition. It's not our tradition, but in Lebanon, that's how they do it. And so the bishops, I don't know if the Roman Catholic bishops in Lebanon also do something similar. It wouldn't surprise me. It would be within the way that the liturgy is set up. So like the bishops of Lebanon can make a decision like that. And local bishops can set certain things. For example, in the U.S., the local bishop or the state conference of bishops sets the holy day of obligation of Ascension Thursday, because Ascension is on the following Sunday if it's not a holy day of obligation. And it basically, the Northeast and Nebraska, don't ask me exactly why, I'm not even 100% sure, it's a holy day of obligation on the Thursday for Ascension. And then in the rest of the country, we have Ascension Sunday. So that's, for example, local bishop, or if a local bishop says, hey, there's this blessed who is like a local blessed in the city. So now that he's made blessed, we're going to make his feast day an obligatory, a feast in here in this diocese. That's fine. That's reasonable within the realm of what a bishop would do, because that's a local saint. And this is the important part here is that third one, that don't add, don't remove, right? This is the say the black, do the red again, right? As a priest, don't ad lib, don't do, hey, I'm going to be creative about how I say the liturgy. No, the liturgy is here to help us enter into the mystery. The liturgy is not here for me to be super creative. If you want to be creative, give a good homily, give good preaching, right? Paint a beautiful picture of Mary or something like that, right? Those are things that we as priests have plenty of opportunity to be creative in. I'm not going to be creative in rewriting the Eucharistic Prayer 3. That's not what you're asked to do as a priest. You're asked to say Eucharistic Prayer 3, or whichever one you choose to do that day, as it is said. And I'm sure all of us have, well, I'm not sure all of us, but many of us have examples. I have examples. I'm not going to give them because that's going further on. So we're going to move on to paragraph 23, which is about general things and we're just going to read the text, and then I'm going to give a brief commentary, and we'll be done for today. So paragraph 23, that sound tradition may be changed and yet may remain open to legitimate progress. Careful investigation is always to be made in each part of the liturgy which is to be revised. The investigation should be theological, historical, and pastoral. Also, the general laws governing the structure and meaning of the liturgy must be studied in conjunction with the experience derived from recent liturgical reforms and from the indults conceded to various places. Finally, there must be no innovation unless the good of the church genuinely and certainly requires them. And care must be taken that any new forms adopted should in some way grow organically from forms already existing. As far as possible, notable differences between rites used and adjacent reasons must be carefully avoided, right? So this idea of the combination of tradition and progress which is going to come up a few times here, the idea of the hermeneutic continuity. We read the documents of Vatican II, continuity with the past and continuity with the documents since then, John Paul II or Benedict or Francis or things like that, right? And so this is really what we do. And the progress should not be, hey, let's try and be new and creative. No, the progress is to restore that authenticity, right? Get back to that central point of the liturgy, the central points of the liturgy. Focus on that, right? And it's not progress for its own sake. In fact, even notes 3 kind of investigations that should be done beforehand, right? The theological, historical, and pastoral, right? Theological, you want the change to better reflect the theology we have about the liturgy, right? Okay, we have the doctrine of transubstantiation, the bread and wine become the body and blood of Christ. And if, let's say in 2200 or something, there's some discussion of like changing some of the words in the Eucharistic prayer, well, does that better reflect this dogma or not? That's the question. What about the Bible verses cited in this? Is this coming from the Bible as well? Or is this kind of coming from non-biblical sources? The historical, what is the history of the liturgy, right? Because the different prayers in the liturgy often go back quite a ways. The Roman canon, Eucharistic prayer 1, we can date back to 400-ish AD approximately, with very slight changes, right? And things like that. So it's not just, hey, we don't just make it from scratch. And then the pastoral, how does it make sense for the people of God, right? So does this help people understand liturgy? Does this help the pastoral ministry, right? And then it talks about only make changes when the changes are good for the people. Make an organic change. Don't be like, hey, let's rupture and let's make an organic change, right? For example, I've known churches where it's like, okay, there's some practice a little bit outside the norm, but then it's like, okay, let's bring in and let's change them one at a time, right? And things like that, and make the organic changes, not make kind of rupture and divisive changes. And that idea of geographical unity, right? That it's not like you cross the border between Canada and the U.S., it's radically different. There are certain cultures like Zaire, and I think it's like the Mayans or somewhere down in Latin America, have slight variation of the Roman Rite, significant variations where it's actually called the Zaire Rite or things like that. I guess it would be Democratic Republic of the Congo, not Zaire now. But that part of the world, they have variations which are approved, right? But they're still relatively similar. And so that idea of that continuity through space. So we're not going to like cross the border between, Pennsylvania and Ohio and have like a totally different liturgy. Now, obviously, at certain points, you're going to have like between the Roman Rite and the Byzantine Rite, the kind of, out in Poland, Ukraine area where it goes from the Roman Rite with the Poles and the Ukrainian Rite with the Ukrainians. Yes, those are quite different. So anyways, we need to end here. Thank you for listening to this episode back in a year. This is a listener-supported podcast. You can donate to help StarQuest produce it. Another great podcast at sqpn.com/give. You can give one time, monthly, or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow, we're going to continue on Sacrosanctum Concilium, and we're going to cover paragraphs 24 to 27 on the importance of Scripture and the community in the liturgy. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which should provide a blueprint for the Church. Go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook or X for more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan.
Amen.